Welcome back to Senior Choices. I'm your host, Brent Veasey, and we've just had our first segment talking about all the different insurance open annual enrollments going on right now. The Medicare annual enrollment that ends on December 7th and the Marketplace annual enrollment that ends on, I believe, December 15th, okay? So now we're going to transition into something that we've been talking about a lot on our show, and that is Washington, D.C., and in particular, our quest to make sure that we have a funded government. Yes, funding the government. Discretionary spending. So in our last show, before Thanksgiving, our House of Representatives was coming up to the deadline for being able to pass something that's going to keep our government funded, remember? And fortunately, we were able to actually get something passed that's going to fund the government past the end of the year, okay? Now, as is usually the case, they came up with something convoluted so that you get half the government that's going to run out of money on January 18th, and then the rest of the government is going to run out of money on February 2nd, like Groundhog Day. Don't know why they thought that was a good idea to do it that way, for sure, but that's what they came up with. But continuing resolution, funding the government as it is, and just making sure that it's going until these dates, okay? So the good news is that our government's going to stay open through Christmas and the New Year's. That's the good news, and that is good news for us. The not so good news is that especially the Republican Party really haven't figured out how they're going to do what they should be doing, which is governing, okay? Because remember, all of this is because Congress has not passed what we call the appropriation bills, right? So we have 12 departments of government, okay? Each department has its own appropriation bill, okay? And the Congress and the Senate have to approve one for each department and then send it to the president, and then the president can sign or veto it, okay? But that individual bill is literally what is going to be funding that particular department on its discretionary money. There's mandatory money that's over here, and then there's the discretionary money. The mandatory money, it's fixed. No matter what, it's there. It has to be there. That covers a variety of things, like most aspects of Medicare, Social Security, those types of things. But then we have the discretionary money, and that's basically anything other than those things, which is a lot of like law enforcement, Border Patrol, Pentagon, those types of things. So what's happened is that we have the Senate that's been having some other kind of things it's having to deal with too. So they voted all their bills out of their committee, the Budget Committee in the Senate, but they've not been able to bring very many of those up on the floor yet because they have all this other stuff that they have to try to get addressed, which is confirming all appointees, judges, and all that, confirming our military officers. So when a military officer gets promoted, those promotions literally have to be voted on and approved by the Senate. Now, normally it's just a, done deal type situation, okay? Because who's going to argue whether a captain should be promoted to a major at a base? But they don't. Because what's happening is that all of these promotions are now being caught under some other thing, because typically it's by acclamation. All the senators just say yay, they're present, and then all the promotions get done. Okay? But if one senator decides no for any reason, then you can't have those promotions approved unless they're taken up individually, which has never happened. But that's where we are, because we've had one senator from Alabama who has said, no, we're not going to promote anyone in the military until he gets what he wants. It keeps coming back to this, no until you do what I want, doesn't it? And that's where we are on this. So the Senate has to spend floor time debating some things, like how they're trying to get around this, trying to get some of the larger ones, like the head of the whole entire military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had to be reapproved, and they had to spend time and floor debate on that instead of just being done by acclamation. So this is causing things to slow down in the Senate too. And they're not able to approve all of their spending bills that their committees already overwhelmingly approved because of this. Okay. But for them, it's just a matter of having the time and ability to go ahead and do it. Okay. The House is a different story, because they can't get they've got 5, I think, maybe 7 of their appropriations bills being able to have been approved by the floor, on the floor. Okay. The rest of those bills, they can't even get to the floor, and they can't even get out of the committee. Okay. And that's because the Republicans themselves are fighting amongst themselves on a variety of different reasons, because of how their majority is so small. They basically can only afford to have 4 or 5 Republican congresspeople vote no on any bill that they want to see approved, and then they would have to get approvals from the Democrats. Okay, so you would think the easiest thing to do would to say, okay, if we can't approve it amongst ourselves, we will need to get something approved. So why don't we go ahead and find something that we can get a lot of people to vote for, so that we would be able to get something done, right? That's what you would normally think. But that's not how this body works, because it's not about doing that. It's about trying to do what they want for the people, only the people that vote for them, called their base. Okay? So they only want to vote on things that their voice, their base would like. Okay? And that's it. They don't want to consider anything else. That's where we are. And so now you've got groups of, well, factions. Let's just call it for what it is. It's factions that are looking at this from different perspectives and lenses. And for that reason, it's very tricky for them to get anything out to the floor. After this station break, we're going to go into more detail about this and the repercussions it's going to have for our country and our government here on Senior Choices. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Senior Choices. I'm your host, Brent Veasey, and it's that time where we have to not forget about our great show music, and it's provided by the Silverman Sound Studio and Shane Ivers at silvermansoundstudio.com. This website has royalty-free music available for download and use. All they ask is that you mention them after you use them, like I'm doing now, and how they are supported by donations made on the website. It's a great resource with some great music options available, so please check it out and support it. All right, so we're now talking about funding our government and how we have it funded until mid-January, half of it, and then the rest of it until the beginning of February. But the problem we have now is that the Republicans in the House have not fixed their own internal issues, because you've got a group that we've talked about that just say no to anything that they don't want until they get what they want. So no matter what it is, they just say no. Okay? And then you have others that are not so ideologically focused, but are trying to do things that are specific for their own constituents overall. So their districts, wherever they are, then they're trying to focus on making sure that things that benefit their people don't go away, which makes sense. Okay, right? Because that's what they're elected to do, is to take care of their constituents, long and short of it. This is colliding with that group of no people, because no wants to have cuts on everything. Okay? And everything means everything. There's no sacred cows. And a lot of these no's are wanting to do away with some of the things that this other group have for their constituents. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to agree to that. Just because you say no in general doesn't mean that that's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's helping people. So why do we need to cut it? Right? So this is the debate that's going on now within the Republican Party itself. Okay? And they are not agreeing on how to proceed. That's the long and short of it. So, the difficult part in all of this is that the Senate, they've already negotiated and they have a bipartisan set of appropriations bills. Because remember, on all of this, these bills were supposed to be adding up to a number that was set back in the summer when we had our debt ceiling discussion, remember? And the former Speaker of the House and the President negotiated a deal and said, this is the number, that's it. So moving forward, all of our spending needs to add up to this. Okay? And in the Senate, they formulated all their bills to add up to that. And that's why it's being voted on overwhelmingly by Republicans and Democrats to support it in the committee. And probably when they finally get to vote on them on the floor, it'll be overwhelmingly voted on too and passed. Here's the problem. Even if the Senate does get all their bills that are bipartisan passed, and they send it to the House, because it has to go to the House to be voted on before it can go to the President to be signed into law, okay? There's that no group. No, we will not consider those bipartisan bills. They do not give us what we want. So we're not even going to look at them. We're going to do what we want. And then we're going to pass what we want until the Senate is made, I guess, to agree to what we want. Welcome back to Senior Choices. I'm your host, Brent Veasey, and we've been talking about the government funding dilemma and the problem that we have. And it all boils down to what's going on within the Republican Party, because the Republicans are basically having this civil war going on. And they want to be able to either get what they want, which is whatever they want and nothing else, or the other group says, you know what, we need to actually do something for our people and make that happen. That's the debate. Why does this matter? Especially when you have the ability to say, hey, you know what, I think we're going to be able to maybe keep things until April, and then April automatic cuts happen, and then we get what we want anyway. So why do we care about all this? We'll just sit it out and wait until then. Well, here's the problem with all that. Because then you are going on a month-to-month situation, potentially. You're going to lose 2 to 5% of the spending that you were needing to have in the first place. Okay? Because we have a lot of bad things going on out there right now in the world, right? We have all these concerns about what's going on at the border. That's one of the budgets that's going to be impacted by this, that hasn't been approved, voted on. So the president is actually wanting to spend more money at the border, okay? But if all this happens on the appropriation bills, then you're going to have 2 to 5% less money being spent, which means you don't have as much money to even handle the existing situation, let alone trying to address the problems with more border agents, more processing people, more judges to be able to adjudicate and get people processed in the system so that they can either be confirmed as asylum qualified or sent home, because they're not. That's what's going on, folks. That won't happen in this scenario. It won't happen. It also won't happen that we have military resources around the world that are now in either combat or near combat situations. So now we're going to go ahead and cut the defense spending by 2 to 5%. What does that look like? It means less maintenance on planes and other things that are being used by the military. It means less money to be spent on ammunition, for example. Less money being spent across the board on everything that the military needs. We also have an increased terrorist threat against us right now because of what's going on all over the world. And the FBI and intelligence agencies are working around the clock to try to make sure that we stay safe and stop all these bad people from trying to harm us. So now we're going to cut their budget 2 to 5%. How's that going to work? What does that look like? That's what's basically there, folks. That's how it's going to be impacting our direct lives. Not to mention the fact that if you're a direct recipient of some of these programs' assistance, then you would not be getting what you may need on a regular basis to be able to live your best life moving forward. But that's where we are. No, I want nothing else. That's the tenor of the conversations that are going on. Okay? The other more indirect response that's going to happen on all of this is that people are going to lose confidence in the government's ability to actually govern and function. And when that happens, okay, especially in financial markets, then not good things happen financially for the rest of us. So I've talked about it on the show, how we have these ratings agencies that basically look at us and say whether we're a good risk or less than a good risk, okay? And we've had some of them already step forward and say, you're not the best risk because you can't agree to even how you are going to be able to have a budget to spend money on. Right? So one of the largest ones, Moody's, has already issued their little warning on this. And they said, hey, we're watching this, and if you cannot come to an agreement on how much money we're going to have for the government to actually spend, when it wants, then we are going to have to reevaluate your top level rating and maybe just go a step below that. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the price that the government pays for the debt that it needs to be able to issue to fund the deficits that they've been having, it costs more to do that because the interest rates are going to go up. That's what happens. And if the government's interest rates go up, all of our interest rates go up. That is the impact. So we've actually had interest rates kind of stabilizing and beginning to go down a little bit recently. That won't happen if Moody's downgrades the government and makes it harder and more expensive for us to be able to borrow money. Okay? Which you're like, well, borrowing money, blah, 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 blah. That's not the point. The point is that all of us will pay for it, literally, with higher interest rates. And as an end result, our interest payments go up. So by doing this, Republicans are guaranteeing that federal spending will actually increase because we got to spend more to pay on the interest because they're unreliable. That's what we're looking at, folks. So interest rates on cars, homes, anything that you have to buy on any kind of payment program is going to get even more expensive because interest rates will be going up because of all of this. And the end result is that the government's going to spend more money on interest payments, which is not what the Republicans want, is government spending more money. Period. So by doing all of this, they are actually guaranteeing the result that they're against. That's how crazy this is. So instead of trying to find a way to make this work, they are just saying no, and by doing so, putting us on the brink of getting what they don't want, which is more government spending. But that government spending will impact us by making it more difficult for us to get loans ourselves. After the station break, we're going to talk a little bit more about that economy. There's some very good news in the economy, actually. So we're going to talk about that here on Senior Choices. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Senior Choices. I'm your host, Brent Veasey, and we've just got finished talking about the repercussions of what's going to happen in Washington if they can't agree to these appropriation bills and how it can have a very negative impact on us because of higher interest rates, because the government is not going to be viewed as a good risk anymore when it comes to borrowing money, as good of a risk as it has been in the past, which increase our interest payments and costs because we pay higher interest. But all of this is going against the good stuff that's happening actually in the economy. And what's happening out there is that inflation is coming back down. So they issued the numbers on inflation for October, okay? And the consumer price index, okay, that's the one that we pay as consumers. The rate was 3.2% annual rate, okay? Year over year, prices went up 3.2%, okay? In September, that number was 3.7%. So the increase in prices went down 0.5%. Okay, so it went from here to about here. 0.5% in a month. That's a lot. And that's getting much closer to what the Fed wanted regarding their target of around 2%, which is still kind of crazy. But either way, 3.2%. The core inflation, okay, which takes all of the volatile things, fuel, food, out of it, in October was 4%. That's the lowest it's been in well over a year. In September, that number was about 4.1%, 4.2%, somewhere in I think it was 4.1%. So the core inflation is coming down as well. That is awesome news. Okay? And that's why also you saw a little bit of interest rates in general coming down over the past couple of weeks. Because now the pressure on the Fed to go ahead and keep raising interest rates is not there anymore as much. There's still some pressure, but not as much because there's something else going on out there that's going to help the Fed, hopefully, with keeping inflation under control. Okay, and we're going to discuss that in just a second. But what I want you and all people to understand is that of this number, even the stuff that was hot has come down a little bit. So lodging, it increased in October 6.7%. Okay, that's still a lot, and higher than the inflation rate in general. 6.7, not good. But in September, it was 7.2% year over year. So again, a 0.5% decline in the inflation for lodging costs. That's the first time that it's gone down like that. That's a good sign that maybe that market hopefully is beginning to cool off enough to stop pressuring overall inflation in general. Because that number makes up 70% of the consumer price index increase year over year. 70% of it comes just from lodging. Okay? We've seen the cost of gas go down. Okay? That's a good positive. So there's lots of good things happening in the economy, folks, really, that we've been concerned about. And the indications are that that's probably going to continue. What indications are those, Brent? What are you talking about? Well, the markets are telling us that that's really what's going to happen. And the markets are not necessarily the stock market, which the stock market's basically kind of just floating in there a little bit, but not going down, not going up as high, just kind of doing the wave, going up and down a little bit, but basically in the same area. And the reason for that is that there's other markets that are very important that are telling us that inflation may be able to get under control sooner rather than later. And those markets are the bond markets. The bond markets? How does that work, Brent? That's insane. Well, it works this way. We've talked about it, that because of inflation, the interest rates going up, that the yields on the bonds had to go up as well, because you've got to make them enticing for someone to want to invest money in it, right? So with inflation going up, if it's at a fixed rate, that amount is worth less the more that inflation goes up, okay? So to offset that, they have the interest rate yield go up on the bonds. That's how it works. So now the interest rates on bonds are at a point where it's now enticing enough that people are buying them instead of buying other things in the economy. Okay? In other words, I'm spending my dollar on the bond instead of spending my dollar on that shoe I want. That's what's literally happening in some instances. Or putting it into the stock market. In other words, these bonds are helping us be able to take more of the demand pressure people wanting to spend money because they have it off of the economy. That's why it's now kind of stabilizing. The yields were going up, and now it's basically come down a little bit, and now it's kind of just floating there in the 4 to 5% range. Okay? And at that range, it should be good enough to help us take some of that demand pressure off of the economy, but not so high that it causes us to go into a negative area. And for that reason, that's another reason why the Fed is looking at things and going, we don't have to raise interest rates again, because the bond yields are high enough that this is going to help us be able to take some of that extra oomph out of the economy that we need to, in their eyes, to be able to take inflation off the table. That's what's out there. Okay? So, with bond yields stabilizing, that's also showing us that they don't think there's going to be more interest rates going up. Okay? That's the first thing. But the second thing it also does is that in the short term, they have 10-year and 30-year. In both, they're both stabilizing. That means that they are also forecasting that inflation is going to be coming more and more under control as well in the short and long term. That's what that means. That's pretty powerful stuff, isn't it? And that's good stuff for all of us, because we are now seeing this inflation thing starting to come back under control. And that's a huge thing, because it's not happening all over the world. We're kind of like the exception and not the rule in many respects. After the station break, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and the repercussions for us moving forward here on Senior Choices. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Senior Choices. I'm your host, Brent Veasey, and we just talked about inflation and how inflation has been trending down. It did in October again, okay? And it was significant. Excuse me, 0.5%. So that's a big change. And a lot of this is happening because the economy is cooling off, but it's getting into that Goldilocks area. It's not too hot, not too cold. It is just right. So we have just enough growth to not have unemployment, but not too much inflation either. Okay? That's what we wanted. And we're getting there to that point. Okay? And that's a good thing. It's a good thing because you're not seeing it happen a lot in the world. We should consider ourselves very lucky. We just had an Argentina election where they're going to be basically contemplating doing away with their money and going to the U.S. dollar because they have inflation that is just completely out of control. It's not in hyperinflation area yet, but you're in like triple digit inflation. You think what we have is bad? It ain't nothing like you have in Argentina. Over 150% inflation year over year. Okay? So that's what's out there, folks. There's a lot of countries that are not necessarily in that realm, but still in double digits inflation. Even Europe itself, okay, is still struggling with 7, 8, 9% inflation. Britain, still in that boat. And we're at 3.2. We're 3.2, and a lot of the rest of the world is more than double that. Well, you're saying, well, that doesn't help me now. I mean, but it's all about perspective, folks. It really is. Perspective. And understanding that where we were was a mirage. It really was. It was a mirage because we were borrowing those interest rates. Literally. We just went out and spent because at 0% interest rates we could. Okay? And that's what we needed in order to keep the economy afloat because of the pandemic and everything else that was going on. But we were spending and deficit spending because that's what we wanted at the time. That's not normally how it works. And in a market economy, which is what we're in, we are in a market, that's what we're going to get. And some level of inflation is good, folks, because that's what we need in order for businesses to be able to grow and finance and things. But it also indicates that we are a good investment because we are growing. Because inflation is better than deflation. Well, how is that? Prices going down. How is that bad, Brent? If prices are going down, that means there's not enough demand out there and our economy is stagnant or worse, shrinking. Okay? And if we're shrinking, that's not good. And here's another little tidbit for you. Comparatively speaking, just a couple of years ago, China, their GDP was 76% of our GDP, gross domestic product. Okay. Now, as we get to the end of 2023, China's economy is now only 64% of our GDP. What that means is we've continued to grow. China has been growing less than we have, or even gone backwards a little bit. So the gap in about us being surpassed by China, not so much of an issue right now. I've said it before and I'll say it again. China has lots and lots of problems right now. Lots. Okay? One of their biggest financial entities is now saying that it's not able to pay for its bills. Financial entity means that it's not a bank, but it's kind of like acts like a bank because it can give money out to people that need it type situation. Well, not happening now, folks, because they are in deep, deep trouble. To the point to where this industry as a whole that this entity is in, which is like a like $1 trillion or more dollars industry, there's whispers that could be in deep trouble within that country. So they've got serious issues. And a lot of people do around the world. And we have our own. For sure. Like we can't agree on how our government's supposed to be funded. So that's a kind of a big one. But relatively speaking, when you compare what we're enduring with our economy to what other countries are enduring with their economies all around the world, we are basically at the top. Because our inflation is coming under control, is getting less, and we are still growing, folks. People are still hiring. People are still looking for people to hire. All of that. That is good. That is good. And nobody knows the impact of inflation more than me and my family. I can tell you. Okay? Because we are by no means set financially, for sure. Okay? But I can tell you this, that I would rather much more to be here, living with what we have, than basically anywhere else right now in the world. We have things to work on. We have things that we need to get better. That is for sure. But sometimes I think we lose track of that in the day-to-day struggle that we have with life. And I just want people to be reminded that sometimes perspective is what is needed. And the perspective is that, it's bad, but it can be a lot worse, because it is in a lot of other places right now. So maybe be happy with what I got and not complain about it as much, because it is on the trend to get even better than where it is now. That's the truth. So keep that in mind, especially when we're in holiday season. We're supposed to be looking for the good stuff. Hope today was good for you, folks. A lot of updates, a lot of things happening. So enjoy living your best life with Senior Choices. I'm your host, Brent Veasey. Come back next week and check us out again for the best life. Take care.